Today we're going to talk about the light machine guns of Finland during World War II. The Second World War saw machine guns used more than ever before. Lessons were learned from the First World War, and the idea of the light machine gun, although nothing new, saw wide-scale adoption in the interwar years. The Finns only produced one light machine gun domestically, the Lahti-Saloranta Model 26, but this video is all about the other ones that were imported, captured, or even just considered. Let's start with the DP-27-28. When the Soviets noticed that the Maxim machine gun was too heavy for offensive actions, they took inspiration from captured foreign light machine guns. The first light machine guns the Soviet introduced was the Maxim-Tokarev. In the same spirit as the German MG08-15 and the MG08-18 machine guns, it was a lightened Maxim, and just like the MG08-15 and 18, it served as a stopgap solution. Only 2,450 Maxim-Tokarevs were manufactured before its production ended in 1927. The weapon that would go on to replace the Maxim-Tokarev was the Degtyarev light machine gun, or DP-27-28. Degtyarev's weapon had showed great potential during tests in 1924, but improvements and further testing was carried out until 1927, when it performed so well that it was put into production before the last of the trials were even finished. The DP-27 is a full-auto, flap-locked weapon. It weighs 9.3 kilos, has an adjustable gas block, and the gun uses a 47-round Pan magazine placed on top of the receiver. Finnish troops captured over 3,400 Degtyarev M27 light machine guns during the Winter War, and during the Continuation War, some 5,000 additional guns were captured. The majority of the guns captured during the Continuation War were captured in 1941. These were often immediately put into service by soldiers, and the VKT, or Valtion Kivääritehdas, started a salvage program for the weapon. Eventually, the DP-27 would outnumber the domestic M26 in Finnish service by a whopping 2-to-1 ratio. VKT even started their own spare parts production for the gun, as well as setting up magazine production. It was mostly issued to frontline infantry, and in Finnish service the guns were fielded with 6 to 9 spare magazines. Finnish troops favored the DP over the M26 and gave it the nickname Emma. It was much more reliable and had larger magazine capacity. By most accounts, the weapon is accurate, simple, effective, and durable. Like all weapons, the DP-27 had its own issues. A tendency to overheat, jamming the gun and locking the barrel in place. Parts interchangeability was not great. Due to the poor ergonomics of the weapon, reloading it was difficult and required the shooter to break posture by moving the stock away from the shoulder. Both the magazines and the bipods were considered quite fragile. If the fire control group was worn out, it could easily cause the gun to get into so-called uncontrollable fire, where the gun would empty the magazine as one long burst, even if the safety and the trigger were released. The only way to stop it is by gripping the magazine and physically stopping it from feeding the gun by rotation. Next up is the DT, which is a tank or vehicle-mounted version of the DP-27. It entered production in 1929. The internals of the DT is identical to the DP, but since it was intended for use inside of a vehicle, for example as the bowgunner's weapon in a tank, the furniture is way different. The stock, barrel, sights, and magazines of the two weapons have considerable differences. While the DP-27 has a rather typical stock and no pistol grip, the DT has a folding metal stock and a pistol grip. What made the DT machine gun suitable for infantry use was the fact that it was issued with dismount kits to convert the gun into a regular light machine gun. In the same vein as mortar carriers today might carry a base plate for dismounting, or a more finished example, a Pasi carries the tripod for the 50 cal for dismounted use. The kit for the DT contained a removable bipod and front sight. Whilst not great by any standard, lacking in durability and ergonomics, it made for quite a compact and usable package. While the 47-round Pan magazine used in the DP-27 was a single stack, the DT had a triple stack 60-round magazine, making it smaller in diameter but also heavier. The DT machine gun was the most common weapon to be featured in Soviet armored vehicles manufactured before and during World War II. Finnish troops captured more than 450 DT light machine guns during the Winter War, and like the DP-27, put them to use almost instantly, but this time most often mounted in captured armored vehicles. More were captured during the Continuation War, and the peak number of DT machine guns issued by the Finnish military was over 650 in June of 1944. The DT also saw some use with infantry as a light machine gun. In practice, the DT became the standard Finnish tank machine gun for World War II, since it clearly outnumbered all other machine guns used in Finnish armored vehicles. And for this purpose, it performed very well. The DT was quite reliable, but more compact, slightly lighter, and had a larger magazine capacity than the DP-27. These qualities were great for infantry use and for use in forts as well. During the Continuation War, the Finnish also started producing machine gun cupolas for various field fortifications, and some of these were designed to be equipped with the DT machine gun. After the war, the DT remained in training use with the armored vehicles which they belonged to, and retired along with their vehicles. The DTs would remain mothballed until 1986, and in the late 80s some were sold and the rest were scrapped. Ian McCollum over on Forgotten Weapons praised the M21 as being better than the US 1918 variant in almost every category. In short, the M21 was an improved Swedish version of the M1918 A1 bar, and it has an adjustable gas block, 20-round magazine, bipod, and it's chambered in a 6.5 Swedish. During the Winter War, the M21 would mostly be used by the Swedish and Norwegian volunteers that came attached to them in the SFK unit. But during the Continuation War, they were mainly used by rear echelon or garrison units, like the coastal troops. When the Winter War ended, the SFK left 204 M21s in Finnish hands, and additionally, Finland bought 130 more in 1940, leaving the Finns with about 330 M21s. The Finns were later forced to give back 105 of them, since Denmark had just been invaded and Sweden started taking the armed part of their armed neutrality more seriously. For the Continuation War, the M21s were issued mostly to the coastal Jaegers, stationed in the archipelago. On a side note, the coastal Jaegers seem to have gotten a lot of stuff that wasn't standard issue as well. The M21 would later evolve in Swedish service to the M37, but Finland never got any of those. A truly funky looking first-gen light machine gun. The M20 Madsen, featuring a single stack 25-round magazine in 7.62x54R, select fire with a crank-style charging handle and bipod. Early versions had a progressive trigger, but the M20 acquired for the Finnish army has a selector switch. Patented in 1902, the Russians acquired Madsens in 1904, and they saw use during the Russo-Japanese War. During World War I, both the Russians and the Germans used them in limited amounts, and it would ultimately be adopted by over 30 countries. As you can guess, this piece of gear was quite outdated by the Second World War, and in fact most adopter countries were already replacing it or replaced it during World War II. In Finland, the Madsen was in use during the Civil War in 1918, and 7 guns were ordered for evaluation by the newly formed Finnish army in 1919. After trials in 1920, 162 were ordered, and even licensed production was considered, but it never came to bear. By 1923, 600 Madsens were in Finnish hands, and in 1928, 729. Beginning its service in cavalry and bicycle units, it would later be fielded by the infantry in general as more became available. The Lahti-Saloranta M26, which I have a dedicated video on, would gradually start to replace the Madsen, since the M20 proved to be quite unreliable and a bit too expensive. Not that the Lahti would fix any of these problems. The vast majority of Madsens were sold to Estonia in 1937, leaving 60 in Finnish storage, technically making this a World War II weapon. I have no information on what happened with the remaining guns, except that they were sold in the late 50s and early 60s. From World War I fame, we have the Lewis gun. First fielded by Belgium in 1914 with a top-fed drum and unique cooling shroud. Likely the best light machine gun in World War I, it has a rich history that is a bit out of scope for this video. In Finland, the Lewis gun would be acquired first by the Civil Guard in 1918 as they rerouted a shipment of 24 guns originally going to the Russian army. During the Civil War, a small amount of many types and origins would accumulate in Finland. The main problem was the two different calibers, namely the 7.62x54R and the 303 British. The Lewis was put on trial in 1920, ultimately losing to the Madsen machine gun. This would lead to the transfer of all non-aircraft Lewis guns in Finnish storage to the Civil Guard, where they would be used for training purposes. So in 1921, the Civil Guard were the proud owners of 62 Lewis guns. In 1931, the Lahti-Saloranta M26 started to replace the Lewis, and in 1936, the Lewis in all its Finnish variations were up for sale. The remainder would be used in World War II as air-to-air and anti-air machine guns. If the M21 was a better BAR, then the FND was the best. A removable barrel, variable cyclic rate, and a carry handle were contributing factors. The final evolution of the BAR was in fact so good that it even saw post-war production. But for some reason, FN had a hard time with pre-war export sales. It seems as if Finland might be the only country to use the FND in significant numbers during World War II. A lesson the Finns learned from the Winter War was that light machine guns were useful and they should be plentiful. An order was placed for 700 FNDs and they were delivered in early 1940. Not in time to be used for the Winter War, but definitely for the Continuation War that kicked off the next year. They were issued to coastal garrison troops, seemingly because of the caliber not fitting the supply chain of frontline infantry. The FNDs in Finland were chambered in 8mm Mauser instead of Finland's 7.62x54R standard caliber. Of World War I infamy, we have the Chauchat. A very French innovation, it suffered all the faults of being on the cutting edge of innovation and being French. Originally manufactured in a bicycle factory, it proved to be lacking in multiple departments. The magazine was the main villain because of the exposed sights. Ergonomics were horrible, reliability was bad, and parts interchangeability problematic. This left the weapon without interwar success, and the Finns had by hook or by crook gotten about 15 of them by the end of the Civil War. All of them would be sold in 1937 to some poor bastard. But during the Winter War, the lack of light machine guns was so severe that Finland accepted a generous donation of 5,000 Chauchats by the French, which indicates just how much love the weapon got from its own military. They were delivered in 1940, again not in time for the Winter War, except for 100 being issued to the coastal artillery. In the beginning of the Continuation War, some were issued to frontline infantry, which tried to replace them with DP-27s as quick as possible. The weapon would go on to serve in garrison units, and in autumn of 1940, a modification program was started, which would span 2,400 guns by 1941. In practice, this was a new sight placement and a cheek pad. They were mothballed until 1955, and in 1957 an exchange was started where the Finns received Sten guns in exchange for about half the guns. The remainder were sold in 1960. All information for today's video has been taken from the Jaeger Platoon website. Check them out. That's it for today. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more.